Hi guys, we are going to be looking at gyotaku. What does it mean? It means fish print in effect. It's a Japanese method of taking a print from a fish, from a real fish. Now we are not going to be taking prints from fish, we're going to be making our own print plates, but I want to show you this process because it's quite interesting. Apparently, the purpose of this was when you've been out fishing in the olden days before cameras, rather than take a photograph of your catch and put it on social media, you would take a print of it. So you'd take it back to your studio, wherever your home, you'd cover it in ink, and then you'd take a print off with thin paper. Now I'm going to do a version of this using a child's toy. So here we have it. This is the toy that I've bought in Asda, especially for the job. It's kind of like a rubbery crocodile. It's got good surface texture. It's a little bit bendy, so it has some qualities a bit like a real fish. And here we have the ink. I've pre-mixed a green colour and I'm rolling it with the roller on a nice palette and then holding the print plate, which happens to be the rubbery toy croc. I'm applying ink, making sure I'm rolling it onto the different surfaces. See how I'm going down onto the leg there? You'll see I'm moving it around, making this as easy as possible for myself. There's no point doing it at some awkward angle. I'm struggling to get the ink all over the upper surface. Going over some of the bits. I'm going to have some inky fingers. You can see I'm getting some inky bits on the backing paper as well. Reapplying the ink nice and thick, checking those legs again, checking those toes, and I think I'm nearly there. So the next stage, we're moving on to taking the print. So I have a nice clean piece of paper in the background, because remember the previous one where I was inking up has loads of messy ink in the background. I've taken a thinnish piece of paper, I've popped it on top, and using the palm of my hands I'm pressing, and then using my thumbs I'm pressing down. Obviously this is not a flat print plate, it is a three-dimensional toy. So I'm having to rotate, move that paper, crease that paper. Dirty fingerprints though on the back, I'm not so happy about that. But the print has worked out quite well. And there we have my gyotaku style print. So the next thing I had for you is the inspiration for this project. And this dates back to when I started my teacher training and becoming a teacher back in the late 1990s. And this little piece of polystyrene is a print plate. I'd never done this process before, by the way. I'd only ever done lino. And I've drawn the design onto it and then I've printed it down here. It's fairly basic, but this is the place where I was thinking about a project and texture and mark making and print processes. I thought this will be a fun place for us to start. You don't have to use fish if you're doing a project like this in your own work. You could use any subject matter, but the fish are the theme for our work. You can see I've collected various bits of reference material. This is by Damien Hirst. This is a picture of a fish that I sadly used to own many years ago. It had passed away. And here's some rather nice graphic drawing. So we need some reference material to draw some fish. So on the worksheet, you will see various bits of reference material. You might want to go and find your own. And I've said you can be faithful to a single source. By that I mean you can take one of these fish or your own and you can draw it literally. You can copy it exactly as it is, or you could take elements from multiple fish and be inventive and create your own sort of hybrid design. So here we have some fish that I found in that very old sketchbook, and I've no idea when I was drawing these, but if you look at them, there's loads of detail, loads and loads of detail and observational work. I've not finished the fish, as you can see. I've focused in on the faces of these fish, but I've got the shape down. Notice light under drawing, and then as I build up the texture and detail, I'm working more into it. But that's not really the kind of drawing I'm looking for. It can be much more basic. I also found in that very old sketchbook these guys. So quite simple shapes, quite pattern based imagery. So I'm going to work in this style. Now remember, if we haven't drawn for a while, we might be feeling a little bit rusty and unsure. So overall, let's look at the shape, whichever fish we're going to look at. Let's draw a rough shape. I might start with a very small sketch. You don't have to do a big drawing, just getting back in the space of drawing. All these fish are pointing that way, so I'm going to draw my doodle fish pointing that way. I'm going to make it as easy as possible for myself. So there's its main body quite lightly. Its eyes somewhere over here. It's got a gill bit somewhere here. I can see it on different fish. I'm using multiple source pictures. It's got a little mouth. It's got fins. It's got a fin at the top. It's got a fin coming off here. I can see it on the skelly fish. Another fin there. A pair of fins, in fact, it looks like. Some sort of fin there. And there's a tail shape here. So that's my kind of light sketch under drawing. And now I'm going to work into it with a bit more detail. So I'm going to draw my fin in, pressing harder. I might go for a kind of textural fin. I can see one over here. I might introduce some lines into that. Now in this print process, we can't have the mega detail you saw in that original drawing I was showing you a minute ago. Its eye is a bit cartoony. It's got a central dot, and it's got a circle around it. So I'm just going to work into this and draw my shape of my fish. Now remember, with the design, you're not necessarily thoroughly committing, you are trying and working out. I'm drawing those lines on the tail, pointing back into the tail. So it's not like a triangle where everything is just going flat. They're all pointing into the point. You see what's happening there? I've got a curve in turn, but you can see it. I'm going to draw my gill in. What sort of pattern should I put in? Well, I could do a nice, just scaly pattern. If it goes wrong, I can take a rubber to it, or I could start drawing another fish and experimenting with more than one design. This guy's got a sad, miserable mouth. Got a big eye. He's got a wider body, this guy, hasn't he? So I'm going to sort of maybe go a bit more with the old skelly fish here. I'm going to put bone-like lines onto it. I go for a bigger fin at the top. So remember, a design drawing is not necessarily an observational drawing. You're playing around with things. There's some Warhol examples to get us thinking about colour later down the bottom. Quite a simple line drawing, quite confident in its marks. Remember, none of that hairy dog sort of line. Nice clean lines. If you're not sure on things, lightly sketch them, then build your nice clean lines over the top. So jumping forward a little bit, here's a print plate I've made. It's made out of material which is polystyrene. This stuff is not particularly good for the planet, so we're only going to work with a small piece. Obviously if it goes to landfill, but you've seen I've got these very old pieces of polystyrene that I've kept for years, and I've got them in my sketchbook, so I'm not going to unnecessarily fill any landfill with this. Here we have the polystyrene. You can see it's quite thin, and if I bend it, it will snap. Now if your actual print plate snaps, and it might, you will repair it with a little bit of a strong tape, not a sellotape or not like a masking tape. Both of those things probably won't hold. Something like a bit of gaffer tape. This is a strong heavy duty tape, and all we will do is use a little bit of that tape on the reverse and carefully pop those pieces back together. Let me get them at the right angle. Pop them back together, cut off any excess. So you will see it's still got a weak point. If you're a wannabe engineer, look at that weak point we've got there, but we'll still be able to ink and print it. So what we do is we draw our design onto the polystyrene and we press with our pencil into the surface. We then take an ink roller and roll the ink onto the upper surface. So where these little grooves and marks are and lines, because I've pressed in with my pencil, they're indented, they're down. So when I take the print from the fish, you can see it's a bit like a hand print, it prints in reverse. When you print it, you can see the textures that I've drawn here appear there. Now that's a single colour print. I can put more colour on it, I can put a bit of blue, say, on its head, realign it quite carefully and overprint it. I've shown you that at this stage so you get a feel for what we're going to do in the whole video before you develop your design. So I'm going to take my small piece of polyprint and I'm going to just lightly sketch my drawing, the one I was happy with, onto it. If it's not exactly the same, it doesn't really matter, as long as I've got the main characteristics of my fish. So I've got my little shape going down, looking at my reference material, looking at my drawings. You can see quite lightly just going down. I'm not pressing in at this stage, not at all, just drawing on. And then I'll start pressing in. Now when you press in, if you just sort of stab it in and drag it, you get these kind of quite uncomfortable marks, and they might show up. So if you go at it quite gently, you can see that's a much cleaner line. Now, the quality of your outcome is dependent on your control of the pencil as you're pressing in. And I suggest at the beginning you just go quite cautiously. When you get the feel for it, you'll then be able to develop your technique. So I'm pressing quite carefully and drawing the main elements of my design. I'll come back to you in a few minutes. So I've wheeled out my old sketchbook and I've got my poly print plate right in front of me. And if you can see, I've drawn around and I've pressed in. So the pencil has been in all those grooves. And I'm looking back, I quite like that fin that's there actually. I'm going to put that in as well. I'm going to look at this and I'm going to now start adding my pattern and texture. Now if we think back to our Japanese fish print and the crocodile that I printed, it was lifting texture and pattern off the surface, and that's what we're going to be doing when we're printing. I'm going to put some of those lines that I did before. You can't rub out when you're doing this. You've got to make a commitment. If something doesn't quite work out as you planned, you're going to have to style it out and work out a new solution. Welcome to being an artist. Not everything goes quite the way you want it. It's cool. It's one of the good bits about it. You have to modify design, come up with different options, always be inventive. So I'm drawing into those bits, those fins. I want some pattern into these. I can't get loads of lines close together or squash this whole bit, so I'm just going to have a few. Will I get more than one in there? Just about. This fin I'm not that keen on, but it'll do. And I like that line down the centre. I'm having that again, but this time I'm doing it as a dotted line. I like the old dotted line. I love those lines, a bit like the fish bones. So I'm going to just start drawing those in. Now they're kind of parallel. So I've put in those lines, but I really like the dot textures. And here I've got a kind of odd bit where the gill comes up to there. I've got a bit of space. So I'm going in a quite careful way, putting a pattern. Think about the density and distribution of marks. Do we want it to kind of fade out? See how I've got it fading out? They're getting further apart. What should I do? Maybe have a few of those down here too. Looks like it's got a case of the freckles, but I like those. Onto these I might have some other kind of standout patterns. This is very pattern though. I don't really know if there's a fish like this in the world. Probably is somewhere in the deep. There's parts of the ocean we have never explored, aren't there? So who knows? Maybe this fish exists somewhere. So you see how I'm going for little circles. I'm having to construct them, drawing part way and draw the other way. Again, working out as I go. Now, I'm thinking a few small ones will be nice into there. And again, I like a few dots. Now I've started, am I going to fade them out or I'm going to keep them going? Keep the density and distribution fairly similar all the way over the print plate. Now at this point, my print plate has not snapped because I've not been bending it, I've not been twisting it, I've not been doing anything with it other than keeping it flat on my table. But this is the danger zone now. Now I could ink it up and print it like this, but I quite like isolating the object. So you see what I mean by isolating the object? I've cut it out. Now, using a pair of scissors and carefully, still got a bit of tape from earlier on there, carefully cutting around. This is the bit, you can hear it. Can you hear that noise? That creaky sound, like a haunted house. Creaking doors, creaking floorboards kind of sound. Right, here we go. We're cutting around those. See how I'm going zigzagging into those sections. Now, if I cut anything too fine, I might find that it snaps off. It's not going to snap off if I'm careful. I'm going to actually work with it bending to try and pull that piece out. Here, I'm going to cut into there. I'm going to cut into there. And carefully, I'm going to tease that. snap it. So in a moment I'll have finished cutting it out. I've got some very fiddly bits to do in here, so I'm going to cut in there. I'm feeling very nervous about this one. Teasing it, pulling it out. You see, very carefully. You can just go for it if you're a bit more heavy-handed. Oh, I'm going to cut that fin snap that fin if I do that. I'm going to have to carefully do it. Now remember, if disaster occurs and a fin snaps off, what can I do? Think from earlier. Yep, you've got it. I'm going to get some of my good quality thick tape, not masking, not cello tape, something thick like gaffer tape, and I'm going to just do a tape repair on the back. You've seen me do one. So all is not lost. You don't have to do a restart, even if it's snapped completely. So that is now ready for the inking stage. So it's taken about 16 minutes to make this vid so far. So what I'm going to do is do the printing, the inking and printing in the next video. So you've now got your print plate. We'll pack away for today and I'll see you next lesson.